Hey, gang, welcome again to the Ministry Show. We got what I think is going to be a great show for you today. And the reason why is we're going to be talking about volunteer myths. And there's a bunch of them out there. You can't have expectations for volunteers. Volunteers get extra wobble room. They don't have to show up on day. All kinds of different myths out there. So we're going to hopefully debunk a few of those and help you combat them within your ministry.
Last week, we introduced the 5 habits of thriving ministry, and this show is going to springboard on that. If you happen to miss those, you can log on to theministryshow.com to catch up.
One of the things that happens often in ministry is people get the viewpoint that I'm just a volunteer or that they don't have any authority to act and things like that anyway. And really that's because we often forget that people want expectations about their ministry role, but they want them ahead of time, not behind time. This myth that you can't have expectations for volunteers. Pam, I want you to throw a couple sticks of dynamite towards that, blow that out of the water. Why do you think that we need to have expectations for our volunteers?
I've seen where volunteers come in and there's no expectations and there's no clarity and people get frustrated and they don't come back and serve. And then the leader of those teams will say things like, well, they're just volunteers, we can't expect. Well, the reality is, yes, you can expect because we should all be doing ministry with excellence, whether paid or unpaid, doesn't matter. So having clear defined expectations, handbooks, orientation, all those things, our job really should be to help volunteers set them up for success so they can thrive in ministry and do a great job.
I found out about expectations and clarifying them as a young man when I got married.
Good analogy.
Okay.
I know where you're going.
And so, or maybe you found out about some expectations if you've ever gone on a date, or there's lots of different metaphors that we could use. But when I married Kathy, her expectations of me were similar to how she saw her mother and father interact with one another. That put me at a great disadvantage because her dad is an awesome handyman. He is one of these guys that can build ships inside of bottles. He's artistic and he loved doing yard work. He used to work at a golf course, a greenskeep. I hate doing yard work. I'm so clumsy. I can get on a ship if it's on the water.
And that wasn't so good. You shared that story.
So all of a sudden there's these sort of expectations like, why isn't Chris doing that? And there were great reasons because I'm either not good at it, I don't care about it or whatever. We need to make sure that we give clear expectations to our volunteers because that way they can win.
Right.
And in ministry and in every other part of life, wins create energy. If your volunteer doesn't know if they're winning or not, then they kind of get a little bit downtrodden and wonder and wander, and both wondering and wandering are horrible things to happen in ministry. So we find that those clear expectations really help with that. Clarifies the win so your volunteers can be energetic and enthusiastic, and then it eliminates them wondering or wandering in ministry.
I think one thing I learned over the years is I can never over communicate. It's so important to communicate well, even in relationships. When my husband and I have those little, I don't know what you would call them. I don't want to call them fights because we don't fight, but just maybe some frustration points. It all boils down to communication. Either I did a terrible job at it or he did a terrible job at it, but communicating is going to help your volunteers. Clear expectations.
You can get with your team and talk about different volunteer myths that might be in and around your own staff team. There's several that are going to be listed here for you. You can expect little or nothing from your volunteers. One of them that I used to think, volunteers will see the need like I do.
It's a myth.
Yeah. Well, when I actually looked at it, I was like, I'm the biggest dummy in the world because God has given me a position of oversight and some level of leadership and certainly authority. Of course, I'm going to see things from a different perspective. And so what I need to do is exactly, Pam, what you said, and that is communicate the need so that they can be aware of it instead of being frustrated that they don't see the same things that I see.
We call these people volunteers, and we know that there are churches that don't use that. So I've heard, Chris, I think probably you have as well, so whether it's volunteers, ministers, I've heard unpaid staff, regardless, whatever your word is, we're talking about the same thing, the same people.
Again, you and your team talk about what myths might be existent within your own ministry. And then instead of being concerned or frustrated about the myth, what's the counterbalance to that so that you can get the most out of your volunteers?
Chris, have you ever had to fire a volunteer?
Yes, I have.
How'd that go?
I've never been fired as a volunteer.
No?
I've been fired from a job before.
I'd love to hear that story about you firing the volunteer.
Yeah.
Because that again,
This isn't a counseling session. You're going to help me get over the pain of losing it. No,
that's a different show.
But anyway, that's a different show. Yeah, I can't believe you went there.
I did. Because here's why.
Okay.
I think we put up with things from volunteers because we feel like we didn't hire them, we didn't pay them, we can't fire them, or we have to somehow cater, and we can cross into dysfunction in that. So how can we have this healthy volunteer team where our expectations are there, we've given clear communication, but if they don't do what they're supposed to do, especially if it becomes maybe a liability, we have to fire them.
Okay, well, I'll tell you about a specific volunteer. I heard through the grapevine, fairly quickly actually, that this person, we have some golf carts at our campus, and he was driving around teenagers and they were surfing on the back of the golf cart. And I thought, of course he didn't do that. I got in touch with them and I found out, no, he did do that. He was actually quite proud of it, of the kids having fun and all of that. So I explained to him, there's several safety issues involved with that, not only the safety of the children, but then ultimately liability as well. Important that he never does that again. The very next week, I hear from somebody in authority of the ministry he was serving in that they observed this activity. Pam, I'm telling you, for the life of me, I could not imagine that that would be true. So this time I didn't call him. I said, let's go have some coffee. He said, hey, I heard last week that he kind of diverted his eyes, of course, and did admit that, in fact, he had done that. So I had to remove him.
Yes.
I had to tell him, gosh, I'm so sorry, but you cannot serve in this way any longer.
Right.
Because it's just too much of a safety issue. Mm-hmm. And the health and well-being, of course, of the people in our ministry is paramount. Not only their physical health and well-being, but their spiritual health and well-being. And so that was a story of a physical problem that could happen. But we have the spiritual equivalent of people sometimes giving others a ride on the back of a golf cart, metaphorically. So we have to be very cognizant of what's going on in our ministry. And of course, if it comes down to it, we do have to unfortunately remove some people. Don't discount them. Don't throw them away. Help them with more training. Make sure that they know and understand, because we deserve a second chance.
Right.
I've gotten second, third, fourth, ninth, 99th chances. And if we're honest, most of us that are listening to this and engaging, we've had Peter, how many chances did he get?
Right.
I'm not saying that they could never serve again. It's just I can't have that person in an area that involves the safety and security of others. So Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sometimes you can remind and help coach and mentor, and other times like, dude, I told you, I gave clear communication. So we can let our volunteers know that they can have ownership. We talked a little bit about this last week, that ownership, that empowerment. So we definitely want to do that with our volunteers. And we want to let volunteers know that God is going to do what they're going to do in our community and through them. It's so important for them to know how valuable they are in that role.
Let me talk to you just very practically, if you're a ministry leader, pastor, ministry leader, about this idea of ownership. When you allow somebody in your ministry to begin to take ownership, they are going to make you look bad initially. Usually, when people start with ownership, they're not at their best.
That's true.
Last week, I talked about the 5 habits and how they were developed. I was put into a position, I think by the Lord, that I wasn't ready for.
Right.
When we move people into areas of ministry, almost always they're not ready for it. What does that mean? They're going to have failure. And that's going to reflect on you as a leader. So here's my hot tip on this ownership piece. You and I have to be confident enough, self-aware enough, and leave our ego on the side enough to withstand the failures of people that are in our ministry. Now, we can't have people fail and fail and fail and fail. But here's the thing. If we can't withstand the pressure or the wondering or the questions that might come our way because somebody in our ministry failed, maybe a decision, an outcome, or whatever, then we're never going to be able to empower so that we can get that big, huge harvest later, like you did with Kim.
Yeah.
You talked about Kim a couple of shows ago. This idea of ownership, I just want to warn you ahead of time, it's going to cause tension. And you are going to have to withstand the dip, if I could put it that way, of maybe not doing so good in ministry, but then the upspring that happens as the Holy Spirit empowers others.
Right.
Every once in a while, you do hand over the ownership to somebody who takes the reins and runs with it, but that's not normal.
It's not normal.
It wasn't normal
No.
for any of the apostles.
That's right.
Here's one thing that you could do that would help us and maybe help others here on the ministry show. Send us some myths that you and your team come up with that you deal with. I used to think, but here's what I found out. I used to think, but here's what I found out. We would love to have that. The key to combating myths is this. The more clear the expectation is on the front end, the easier it is to get people to comply. In other words, to get a yes. Mm-hmm. So hear me very carefully on this. I don't mean that you think that you're clear. I mean that the people you're communicating with are clear on what you want. Those are two different things.
Right.
Because I know what I want to say, and whether I say it or not, that's a different thing. And I have no clue what they just heard.
Right.
The clear expectation needs to be, here's what I meant to say, here's what I said, and what you heard. All three are the same. Mm-hmm. There's this book here, The Coaching Habit. Say less and ask more. This will really help you to be clear with expectations, allow people to let their yes be a yes, and they will say yes quickly if our expectations are clear.
So I'm curious here. Don't have a you salesman approach. What do you think that is, Chris?
As we're enlisting people in ministry, and then we are empowering them, delegating to them, or wanting them to take over ministry, if all we're doing is coming at it from the side of what I benefit as a pastor or church leader,
right,
then it's going to backfire.
Sure.
Eventually. If we can meet the need of the person prior to, by knowing and understanding them, they'll be much more happy to accept those expectations and deliver exactly what is wanted.
Right. I agree. When I think of salesman, a used salesman approach to, I think of manipulation. You know, are we manipulating to get the things that we want for ministry rather than, like we've talked about, is empowering those volunteers and a whole different mindset.
Let me tell one more story, and then I know you have some action items. I remember when I first was invited to volunteer in ministry. I said yes kind of relatively quickly. I had some motivations that way and wanted to help and be involved and serve. But as the day approached where the assignment was meant to take place, I had absolutely zero training. I had no communication other than saying yes. I did not know what was going to be expected of me, except for I knew to be at Gary's house at 7 o'clock. That's all I knew. I had zero training on not only what we were going to do, but how we were going to get it done or what the expectation was. So guess what happened? Sweaty palms. I'm having flashbacks. I'm having sweaty palms right now, even as we're talking. And so why am I bringing that up? For you and I that are in ministry, pastors and church leaders, it's our workaday normal and average world. So we're used to it. It feels comfortable to us. But that's not how our people feel, especially if they're new to ministry. They have now just stepped out of their comfort zone into an area that they might not feel as confident. Men and women need the expectations to be clear up front so that at least they can know them and know that you'll train them, walk alongside them, and help them along the way. Now, why is that so important? Because people will last over the long haul if they meet the expectations that you lay out because they've won. We all know that ministry is addictive. One of the ways that we can help people last over the long haul, explain those expectations up front, hold people accountable to them so that they can win in ministry, which then you win in ministry, then your church wins in ministry, and ultimately the kingdom wins in ministry. That's about 4 or 5 wins in a row.
And that goes back to what you said in the beginning, thriving ministry.
Thriving ministry.
Mm-hmm.
What are some action steps that people today can take?
Here's a few examples. People should be on time. That's an expectation that you can give to them. For me in children's ministry, on time means 20 to 30 minutes early.
Okay.
Be prepared. Come and connect with us, pray with us. Personal hygiene obviously is one, especially when you're working with youth, particularly males. You have to kind of set that expectation. How long is the commitment? You know, if you want them to stay committed to it, I would say a minimum of a year. You're investing your time in volunteers. You're doing life with them. It's a relationship between both of you. So what kind of commitment do you want to expect from them? Do they find their own replacement? Do they come back to you and say, hey, I'm not going to be available. You find my replacement. These are clear expectations that volunteers need to know.
Clarify your expectations, but don't come up with a laundry list.
Right.
What are the 2 or 3 things that are most important in this endeavor in ministry. Usher, greeter, small group leader, pastor, worship leader, band member, hospitality person, doesn't matter what it is. So your action item, either by yourself or with your team, come up with 3 expectations for each one of those roles. Just 3. And then after you come up with them, you can ask yourself this question. Is this expectation clear to the people that are fulfilling this role? And if it's not, just clarify it with them. Hey, did you know that this is what I want?
Right.
You know, did you know? Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry I didn't make that clear. Here's what we're looking for. Oh my goodness, people get energized. Next week, we are going to start with the first of the 5 habits of thriving ministry.
My favorite.
It's your favorite. So we wanted to kind of just get this volunteer myth thing, you and your team thinking about that, processing through that, so that you can, again, continue to refine your own philosophy of ministry, because now, starting this next week, we're going to get into the how to and the what to. And this is going to be a fun ride. We'll see you next week at the Ministry Show. Thank you so much for participating. Continue to connect with us. Send us your questions, your comments. That'll help us shape further shows. So we appreciate you. God bless you. Have a great week.